So today's presentation is going to be the final presentation in our series on the Adam-God doctrine. And this final presentation is going to be about Adam-God in ancient religions. This is a fascinating subject to cover, and there's a lot to it. And this is just going to be a very brief overview. So just to point people in the right direction because there's a lot more that could be covered in this, and we'll probably cover it eventually in other presentations as well. But um, this is just going to be an introduction to the subject of how the Adam-God doctrine can be found in many different ancient religions. So to start off with, Brigham Young mentioned this, or at least alluded to the fact that the religious traditions of the world came from the fact that God dwelt among the first inhabitants of the earth. And so a lot of this information on Adam, God, and ancient religions wasn't known when Brigham Young revealed the Adam God doctrine. It's stuff that has come, some of it hasn't been published until fairly recently. The Nag Hammadi library with some Adam God stuff, the Ugarit writings with AdamGod stuff, all those weren't discovered until the Ugarit stuff wasn't discovered until the 1920s. It was when the city of Ugarit was rediscovered. The Nag Hammadi library wasn't discovered until the 1940s. And so a lot of this stuff, the vast majority of it, if not almost all of it, was virtually unknown to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. And so I think it's an important faith builder, the fact that we do have these evidences for the Adam God doctrine. So Brigham Young mentioned that the religious traditions of all of the ancient world came from the original Adamic religion. He said, "Can we tell how much better Mormonism is than the other religions and isms of the present day? More or less truth may be found in them all, both in civilized and barbarous nations. How has it transpired that theological truth is thus so widely disseminated? It is because God was once known on the earth among his children of mankind as we know one another. Adam was as conversant with his father who placed him upon this earth as we are conversant with our earthly parents. The father frequently came to visit his son Adam and talked and walked with him, and the children of Adam were more or less acquainted with their grandfather, and their children were more or less acquainted with their great grandfather. And the things that pertain to God and to heaven were as familiar among mankind in the first ages of their existence on the earth, as these mountains are to our mountain boys, as our gardens are to our wives and children, or as the road to the Western Ocean is to the experienced traveler. From this source, mankind have received their religious traditions." So, just to start off, pointing people in the direction of recommended literature on Adam, God, and ancient religions. So, the first Adam God book I'm aware of that really touched on this was The Adam God Maze by Collier Christensen, published in 1981. And he has a chapter 12, on Adam, God, and the ancients, which is really good and has a lot of, it describes Adam, God, and ancient religions. So that's a good first publication that touched on this. The second publication, this is one of my favorite Adam God papers that's ever been written, is Fred Collier's paper, Doctrine of the Priesthood, Volume 8, Number 1, New Light on the Ancient Hebrew Christian Doctrine on Deity, which was published in 1991, which was a paper he actually presented at Sunstone a couple of years earlier. He called it the L paper, was his short name for it, and it goes into the overlap between the ancient Hebrew religion and the Ugarit Canaanite religion of their neighbors, and how they came from the common source, and this doctrine of mankind being the physical offspring of God, God being an exalted man, is something that's clearly evident in these religious traditions. So that's one of my favorite papers, if you can find it. I think you can probably find at least portions of it on Google Books. And Adam God Maze is something that's out of print as well, but you can find used copies, or I think there's text versions of it available online. And then finally, this most recent book isn't even by Mormon scholars or apologists of the AdamGod doctrine. This last book I'm recommending is Adam, Eve, and the Devil, A New Beginning, published in 2014 by two professors of ancient religion who talk on the ancient Adam and Eve story in the Ugarit, where it's this it's a very different story than the Genesis account, and it depicts them as gods who came to earth to try to stop the corruption of an evil god, Horon, which is identified as an evil serpent god. And they ended up losing their immortality in the process, but were allowed to have immortality through having mortal posterity that would continue. So that's a fascinating book as well, and we'll touch on different things contained in these different books as we go over the different religions. So, and I'm sure there's other things that could be mentioned. I like some of the information I'm going to be sharing in this presentation isn't in any current AdamGod, any of these books. It's new research. And I would also add that Hugh Nibley was a believer in the AdamGod doctrine, and in several of his books I've read, he touches on it um, in kind of a careful way. According to people who interacted with Hugh Nibley, he said he couldn't teach AdamGod by quoting Brigham Young, but he said that he could teach it by quoting the ancients. And so we're in one section of this presentation, we're going to quote where he in the book, An Approach to the Book of Mormon, alludes to the AdamGod doctrine. In his book, One Eternal Round, he alludes to the AdamGod doctrine, and he does it in a number of other places where he writes on ancient religions. So to start off with, AdamGod in early Christianity. Jesus' most common title for himself in the New Testament is Son of Man, but that is actually an inaccurate translation of the Greek, which actually says the title Son of the Man, indicating Jesus was the son of a specific man rather than mankind in general. This appears to be referring to an exalted Adam tradition found in extra biblical writings, but only alluded to in the New Testament. So Joel Marcus, a professor of New Testament and Christian origins at Duke Divinity School and one of the authors of the recent Anchor Bible volume on the Gospel of Mark, in 2003 papers argued this understanding of the title Son of Man was used by Jesus to refer to himself in the New Testament. The abstracts to these papers summarizes his arguments. So in the first paper, he argues the gospel expression, the son of the man, means the son of Adam. The most natural way of constructing the double definitive article is that it speaks of the son of a particular man, namely Adam, who is called the man, I think that's the Greek word for man there, in Genesis 1 through 2 in the Septuagint. The Adam in question, however, is not just the biblical protoplast, but also the figure of later Jewish and Christian legends, which possessed dominion and divine glory, which will be restored to them in the echelon, CF, the exalted Son of Man sayings, who exercised authority over the created order, which he governed as the earthly representative of the heavenly king, the present authority sayings, but who is also associated with the world's present condition of suffering and death. See the suffering Son of Man sayings. And then in his second article published in 2003, he kind of continued this argument, and he said, a look at select passages in the Gospels confirms the thesis argued more generally in part one that the Son of Man means the son of Adam, and that Jesus' self-designation coheres with and draws on biblical and early Jewish traditions about the first man. This does not, however, mean that Jesus is the Son of Man is merely human, since Adam is a figure of great glory, even godlikeness, in some of the traditions upon which the Son of Man sayings draw. Jesus, as the Son of Man, therefore, presents a glorified picture of human destiny, showing humanity eschatologically transformed to fulfill the destiny that God intended for it in the beginning. So the exalted Adam tradition not just was found alluded to in the Gospels, in my opinion, but was an influence on Paul's writings as well, where Paul wrote that the first Adam is of the earth, earthly. The second Adam is the Lord from heaven, 1 Corinthians 15:47. Then Romans 5:13, he says, nevertheless, Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them who had not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him who was to come. So, referencing this Adam being the figure of Christ who was to come. So, the pseudographical text, the Testament of Abraham, a Jewish work from the 1st or 2nd century AD, appears to be one of the apocryphal works that most explicitly describes an exalted Adam cosmology, identifying Adam as the Ancient of Days in Daniel 7 and having authority and a heavenly throne. And so the Andrew Chester in the book Messiah and Exaltation, Jewish, Messianic, and Visionary Traditions and New Testament Christology, in 2007 wrote, Adam is given an extraordinarily high status here. He is specifically enthroned in the presence of the angels, described as a terrifying being who looks like the master, clearly referring to God, and adorned in glory. Thus, his appearance is like God's. He's enthroned, implicitly has all-encompassing knowledge, and takes part in the process of judgment. And so he's kind of describing summarizing what's in the Testament of Abraham, where Adam is the Ancient of Days. He sits on the heavenly throne and is executing judgment. Some may question the New Testament verses cited and other sayings as referencing AdamGod due to them being cryptic or not explicit, but Jesus himself noted that the identity of his Father was an esoteric teaching when he said, No man knoweth the Son but the Father, neither knoweth any man the Father save the Son, and to he to whomsoever the Son will reveal him. Matthew 11:27. So AdamGod and Gnostic Christianity. So the proto-Gnostic work, Gospel of Thomas, which some argue that it wasn't really, some try to argue it wasn't really Gnostic. So that's why I use the term proto-Gnostic, because it seems to have some similarities in ideas. And similarly, and I'm not using that as a negative term because there's arguments that the Gospel of John has proto-Gnostic tendencies as well. So the Gospel of Thomas has certain sayings of Jesus that also appear to hint at the AdamGod, at AdamGod. So credit to Mike Woodings for pointing these out. These are interesting sayings, and there's some interesting stuff with the sayings where there's overlaps with some of the sayings in the other Gospels, and then there's there's totally different sayings, but then there's some sayings that show that that hint at other sayings of Jesus that are preserved in the Gospel of Thomas that are not as well preserved in the other Gospels. When you read it, I can't remember the specific saying off the top of my head, but there was at least one where I think it was whichever Gospel had the specific saying only had like one verse of it, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but the Gospel of Thomas version made a lot more sense. But yeah, so saying number 89, Jesus said, Why do you wash the outside of the cup? Don't you understand that the one who made the inside is also the one who made the outside? Then saying 15 says, Jesus said, When you see the one who is not born of woman, fall on your faces and worship. That one is your Father. The first saying can be seen as a reference to the creator of our bodies is also the creator of our spirits. The second saying appears to reference Adam in the context of the story of him being created from dust in Genesis. So he's saying, the one who is not born of woman, fall on your faces and worship, that one is your Father. And then another interesting thing in some of these apocryphal early Christian works is there's a tradition that when Adam was created in Genesis, that God commanded the angels to worship him, and Lucifer was one of the angels who refused, and so that's why he fell. And so that actually even shows up in I think in the Quran or in other Islamic writings or traditions, if I'm not mistaken. So that's another interesting AdamGod aspect, that the angels were told to worship Adam. So to the Sethian Gnostics, Adam was an aeon. The aeons were considered emanations of deity or God that were eternal beings. And so the Sethian Gnostics were a very interesting sect who emphasized believing that they had preserved tradition of Adam's son Seth as a messianic figure, and that and they believed that Adam was a creator deity. So the Sethian Gnostic Gospel of the Egyptians, also called the Holy Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, they clearly expresses that they held that Adam, the father of Seth, is God the Father. And so in the Nag Hammadi Library's translation of this, it states, Adamus is the first man, he through whom and to whom everything came into being, and without whom nothing came into being. The unknowable, incomprehensible Father came forth. He came down from above for the annulment of the deficiency. So that's a very interesting statement referring to Adam as he through whom and to whom everything came into being, and without whom nothing came into being. So AdamGod and Jewish mysticism. So there's an interesting statement in Wilford Woodruff's journals on September 4th, 1860, kind of alluding to this, where he wrote, Brother George Buchanan said there was a learned doctor that wanted to be baptized. He believed in this work, but wanted to close up his business in New York City first. Said when he was baptized that he should lay aside the practice of medicine, as he believed the Lord had provided means for the healing of his saints without the practice of medicine. He is satisfied that the doctrine of the plurality of God and that Adam is our father is a true doctrine revealed from God to Joseph at Brigham. For the same doctrine is taught in some of the old Jewish records which have never been in print. I know Joseph Smith nor Brigham Young have never had access to, and the Lord has revealed this doctrine unto them, or they could not have taught it. So the above quote may be referencing the exalted Adam traditions and extra-biblical Jewish literature, or possibly to the Jewish mystical concept of Adam Kadmon, the concept of a primordial perfect man called the Most High Man or the Supreme Man. And there's different versions of or understandings of Adam Kadmon. I'm not trying to say that this is that the stuff on it is entirely accurate, but I'm just saying that there's some interesting overlaps with the AdamGod doctrine. So one reference to this concept found in the Zohar states, Adam sitting at the gate of the Garden of Eden. On another occasion, Rabbi Simeon spake and said, It is written, I said, I shall not see the Lord, even the Lord, in the land of the living. I shall behold man no more with the inhabitants of the world. And that's quoting Isaiah 38:11, where if you read the literal translation, I shall not see the Jehovah, even Jehovah, in the land of the living. I shall not behold Adam no more in the inhabitants of the world. So it's this person's arguing that verse is equating Jehovah and Adam. So how great the number of those who are ignorant and take no interest in the secret doctrine. They expend their strength and energy in the acquisition of worldly knowledge, oblivious altogether of the true wisdom, which is both spiritual and divine. When a man departs out of earth life, he has to account for every act and deed committed in it, and meets many with whom he has been acquainted and held intercourse in the world. Evidently, he beholds Adam seated at the Garden of Eden, rejoicing over those who have been faithful, who have faithfully observed and kept the divine commandments. Surrounding him are the righteous who are wise and avoided, walking in the ways that lead down to Gehenna and found the path of light. So it's interesting. He's saying that Adam is sitting at the gate with the righteous saints who were faithful. So AdamGod in Mandaeism, which the Mandaean religion. So another place the exalted Adam concept is found in ancient religions is in Mandaeism, a religious group that are neither Christian nor Jewish, but have many similarities with both, and some concepts that appear to be derived from Sethian Gnosticism. And they believe that John the Baptist was the last prophet and Messiah. They don't accept Jesus, and they aren't really Jewish either. So they're a very unique sect, and they're around even today because of the unrest in the Middle East. There's been a lot of them who have immigrated to first world countries because of the persecution and the other problems that exist in the Middle East where they were living. So Mandaeans practice regular rebaptism for the remission of sins and renewing of their covenants, sacred hand clasps and priestly rites, and a major element of their religion is emulating Adam as the primordial perfect man or ideal priest to be emulated. Coley Christensen wrote about their religion's views on Adam in his book AdamGod Maze. So he wrote, other reflections of the royal man myth are found in the beliefs and rites of the Mandaeans. This sect, still extant in lower Mesopotamia, may be traced back to the early Christian and Palestinian era. Their preoccupation with Adam, who is seen to play two roles, that of the heavenly Adam, the one from which all was made, and the earthly Adam in whom the Adam above indwells, is summarized. So the Mandaeans at baptism are thought to indwell or be indwelt to become like him. Priests especially are held to be Adam's earthly representatives, and many carry his name along with their own. The double Adam who seems to beat the heart of who seems to beat the heart of Mandaean mythology is the archetype of spiritual humanity and priesthood. As heavenly man, he is the archetype of Adam as crowned and anointed mankind. He is the king of the world and the first king, the ruler and father of all other kings and priests. The story of creation is his story, the story of the divine man, Adam, as crowned and anointed king and king priest. The essential concept of Mandaean ordinances is a personal identity with the archetype Adam. So the Egyptian god Atum. So this is another fascinating overlap. I'm just barely scratching the surface on this. Hugh Nibley kind of writes a bit on it in his book, One Eternal Round, kind of touches a bit on this and touches on the Egyptians' belief in first man rights, very similar to the Mandaeans doing first man rights. And we're also going to read where Hugh Nibley writes about the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Mesopotamian first man right after this as well. So some extracts from Wikipedia's article on Atum as the primordial or first god and father of all other gods in the earliest Egyptian religion. So they wrote, quote, he is believed to have been present in ideology as early as pre-dynastic times, becoming even more prevalent during the Old Kingdom and continuing to be worshipped through the Middle and New Kingdom, though he becomes overshadowed by Ra around this time, or Ra. In the Heliopolitan creation myth, Atum was considered to be the first god, having created himself sitting on a mound. In the Old Kingdom, the Egyptians believed that Atum lifted up the dead king's soul from his pyramid to the starry heavens. He was also a solar deity associated with the primary sun god Ra. Atum was linked specifically with the evening sun, while Ra, or the closely linked god Khepri, were connected with the sun at morning and midday. Atum is the god of pre-existence and post-existence. In the binary solar cycle, the serpentine Adam is contrasted with the scarab-headed god Khepri, the young sun god, whose name is derived from the Egyptian to come into existence. Khepri Adam encompasses sunrise and sunset, thus reflecting the entire cycle of morning and evening. Atum was a self-created deity, the first being to emerge from the darkness, an endless watery abyss that existed before creation. A product of the energy and matter contained in this chaos, he created his children, the first deities, out of loneliness. So AdamGod in the ancient Mesopotamia religion. So Hugh Nibley summarized this in the book, An Approach to the Book of Mormon. And this is, look how carefully he alludes to AdamGod and how he writes about the first man rights. He said the religious activities of the Sumerians centered about a ritual drama that took place at the temples built for that purpose at the New Year, celebrating and dramatizing the creation of the world, the fall of man, the redemption and resurrection. The ritual drama began by depicting the original home of man as a Garden of Eden, a beautiful place adorned with greenery, in which the hero, the father of the race, resides. Next, the enemies neared the Eden, for such the Sumerians called the place, destroying and carrying off the god to another place, also called Eden. Eden is thus the world before and also after its transformation, when it becomes a dark and dreary place. We meet with a kind of exodus into the desert as an equivalent to the descendus ad infernos, in which man becomes a homeless wanderer in a land of desolation, a place not to be confused, however, with the underworld or place of the dead. As Halder summarized it, in the beginning we meet with the steppe flourishing with the vendur being the pasture of the herds. Then the enemies from the desert enter the god's field, destroy it, and make it a desert. At this moment, the god descends to the netherworld. Then the change occurs, and finally the gods triumph over his enemies, and his return to life are celebrated. The field again becomes the flourishing dwelling place of the cattle. What we should notice here is not the important resurrection theme or the Garden of Eden motif, or the appearance in the earliest known human records not only of an eschatology of woe, excuse me there, but also of a millennial hope and eschatology of bliss, but the specific reference to this world as a desert. Man has lost his paradise, and though he shall regain it eventually through the sacrifice of the hero who overcomes death, he must live meanwhile as an outcast in a dark and dreary place. In the great Sumerian epic, man is represented by the wandering and homeless hero Gilgamesh, often identified by scholars with Adam, who travels through a dark desert in search of the water of life and the plant or tree of immortality of which a serpent deprives him. Hundreds of parallels to this have been found in folklore and ritual literature everywhere. It is the great heritage of the whole human race. So he identifies the hero Gilgamesh with Adam, but when he's quoting the other scholar talking about it, the other scholar refers to him as the god. So the enemies enter the god's field, destroy it, and then the god descends to the netherworld. Then the god comes, finally the god triumphs over his enemy and returns to life, and it's celebrated as part of the first man rite. So AdamGod in the ancient Ugarit religion. So the city of Ugarit, located in modern-day Syria, was rediscovered in the early 1920s specifically. And when it was unearthed, hundreds of clay tablets recording their religion dating back to the time of Moses, over 1000 BC, were discovered. The literature discovered had significant parallels with the ancient Israelite religious practices and the Old Testament. They worshipped a plurality of gods, but had a presiding god over their divine council, El, and his wife Ashra, who were the literal father and mother of the gods and man. So El was called Adam in some tablets. Additionally, their story of Adam and Eve had significant AdamGod aspects to it. And so this is really covered in depth in the book Adam, Eve, and the Devil, A New Beginning, which I'm not quoting from, but a scholar article about the book when it came out kind of summarizes it. And we'll actually kind of read the back cover of it as well. So the article states, biblical researchers have always assumed that there must have existed a myth of Adam on which passages in the Bible about Adam and Eve are based, so an older myth. And now for the first time, there are also tangible traces. Vineyard of the Great Gods. In the Ugarit myth of the great gods, the biblical paradise is the vineyard. Adam and his wife are among the gods who have access to the tree of life. An evil deity, Horon, wants to usurp the place of the creator god El, the highest god in the Canaanite gods' world. El punishes him for this by throwing him off the mountain of the gods. In revenge, Horon transforms himself into a giant snake who poisons the tree of life, which makes that all life on earth is threatened. The gods fear to lose their immortality and therefore give to someone from their midst, Adam, the power over the whole earth, with the intent of defeating Horon. Adam fails miserably. The snake buries his fangs into his flesh, and Adam becomes a mortal being. The sun goddess offers humanity a consolation prize, though. By reproduction, will man as a species yet remain eternal? To achieve this, she provides Adam with a benign female consort. So, in the back cover of the book, and so this is by several biblical scholars, Marjo C.A. Corpel and Johanna C.D. Moore. So the back cover of the book summarizes. In this book, the authors develop an intriguing theory about the Canaanite origin of the biblical traditions concerning the origin of the cosmos and the creation of humankind. Adam, Eve, and the Devil tells a new story about human beings and at the same time proposes a fresh start for biblical research into primordial traditions. A number of clay tablets from the Ugarit dating back to the late 13th century BCE throw new light, Corpel and D. Moore argue, on the background of the first chapters of Genesis and the myth of Adam. In these tablets, El, the creator deity, and his wife Asherah lived in the vineyard or garden on the slopes of Mount Ararat, known in the Bible as the mountain where Noah's Ark came to rest. The first sinner was not a human being, but an evil god called Horon, who wanted to depose El. Horon was thrown down from the mountain of the gods, and in revenge, he transformed the tree of life in the garden into a tree of death and enveloped the whole world in a poisonous fog. Adam was sent down to restore life on earth, but failed because Horon, in the form of a huge serpent, bit him. As a result, Adam and his wife lost their immortality. This myth found its way into the Bible, the Apocrypha, and the pseudepigraphical literature, though it was often transformed or treated critically. Adam, Eve, and the Devil traces the reception of this myth in its many forms and also presents the oldest pictures of Adam and Eve ever identified, one of them on the front cover of the book. So, lots of fascinating information that shows that the Adam-God doctrine is all over ancient religions, dating back to some of the earliest times that we have literary evidence of religion. And so I'm just grateful for these evidences that really substantiate and confirm what Brigham Young revealed was true. Because there was no way he could have had access to all this information. This is stuff that came out, some of it over 100 years after he taught the Adam-God doctrine, decades and decades after his death. And in my mind, it's a real validation of Brigham Young's standing as a prophet of God, and Joseph Smith as well, because Joseph Smith laid the foundation and taught the seeds of the Adam-God doctrine before Brigham Young. And so I'm grateful for this information. I'd just like to say there's probably a ton more information that could be covered on the subject. Like, this presentation is just barely scratching the surface of AdamGod and ancient religions. And this is a really exciting thing that I hope that there's a lot more research done on in the future. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.